Today's Storehouse Storytime is brought to you by apaperscore.com. Let them help you get your credit back into shape. Better credit, better life. Hi friends, and welcome to Storehouse Storytime, you guys. I'm Ronnie, and I would love for you to help me pick out a new story, you guys. We've read a story called Sometimes When I'm Sad. We've already read that one. We've read I Promise. We've already read I Promise. Welcome to the World. Okay, how about Grace for President? Let's get into today's story, you guys. It's called Grace for President. This story is written by Kelly DiPucchio, and pictures are by, it looks like Lee Yuen Pham. Friends, let's get into today's story. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the presidents' pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? And here we see all of our former presidents, you guys. And true enough, there are no girls, no ladies, no women that have been a part of our presidential history. This is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl president? Ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls? And here, friends, we see her contemplating and thinking really hard. Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over and I'd like to be president. Several students in the class laughed. Oh. Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. The snickering in the room stopped, and Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Mrs. Barrington asked the class. But nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I have invited Mr. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school spelling bee champion. His experiments always took a blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be so easy after all, Grace thought. And there's our friend Thomas Cobb, and there's our friend Grace with a worried look on her face. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat. Everyone except for Grace and Thomas got to choose a state. And guys, here we see a map of the United States, and we have Mr. Waller and Mrs. Barrington, and they're holding the hat that contains all 50 states. The election can begin. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 16 mean? Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. That number is determined by how many people live in that state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270? Asked Rose. That's more than half of all the electoral votes, Mr. Waller said. Becoming president really wasn't going to be easy. So easy, Grace thought. Grace came up with a campaign slogan. Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan. Grace's campaign slogan says, "Make history, vote Grace Campbell for president." And Thomas's says, "Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job." Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. Thomas made up his own list of promises. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. Each week, the teachers set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. This is so awesome, friends. Grace continued to campaign. Then at recess, she gave speeches, but during lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. And after school, she held rallies. Grace is really putting in work. This is truly something that she is super excited about, super interested in, and having a great time in this process. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated that the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment. After school, he played soccer. So it looks like Thomas is putting in work too, but not necessarily towards the campaign. Well, even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad, she organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. And here we see she's doing all the things she promised she would do. She's helping out in the community, she's helping out in the cafeteria, holding rallies. And here, looks like our friend Grace is pooped, you guys. She's put in so much work with her campaign. But remember, she said it still will not be easy against Thomas Cobb. So let's see how she handles this. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special election day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to approach the microphone, and he says, "The Yellowhammer State of Alabama casts its 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb." Fletcher said, "The Last Frontier State of Alaska cast its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb." Hannah called out, "The Grand Canyon State of Arizona cast its 11 electoral votes for Grace Campbell." And so it went. State after state after state cast their electoral votes, and friends, the scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. Ooh, it's getting juicy, guys. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger State of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still unaccounted for. And friends, remember, you need 270 total to win, right? They're so close. And it looks like Wyoming is the state that's left out. So we're waiting for them to cast their electoral votes. Thomas grinned, and Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. Sam didn't say a word. "What are you waiting for?" Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The Equality State of Wyoming cast its 3 electoral votes for... Guys, who do you think is winning? Okay, let's see. Grace Campbell. The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and a few boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. Yes, with 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Oh, man, Grace hugged Sam. "Why did you do it?" she asked. Sam handed Grace his flag because, he said, "I thought you were the best person for the job." The following week, students in Mrs. Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. The end. I love that so much, you guys. How so awesome to experience and walk through the electoral process, you guys, the election process, state by state. This was such a really cool experience, you guys. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I want you to always remember, yes, it is true. We have not yet had a woman president here in the United States. However, if you are the best woman for the job, I trust that your time is coming. Our time in history is coming for that to be true. Not necessarily because you are a woman, but because you are the best person for the job. What an amazing story, you guys. Thank you for an awesome Storehouse story time, you guys. Always believe that you can do it. Thank you, and have a fantastic week.